the FOA, as Lenore said, is your funding opportunity announcement. And in the past, that used to be called the grant guidance. So what is it? It's your recipe for success. Your FOA contains everything you need to know to write your grant. So you should refer to it for putting your application together as well as writing your project plan. What does that mean? It means read the FOA, read it again, and then write a proposal to what the FOA specifies. So I'm going to give you some time now. There's two specific sections in your FOA I'd like for you to look at. It's the award information section and the eligibility information section from pages 2 through 4. So I'm just going to give you a couple minutes to look over that, and we're going to come back and discuss what you find in those sections. So in these two sections, what did you find? Sorry, speak.
Multiple categories.
Multiple funding categories, is that correct? Okay. What were some other things that you found?
Who's eligible to apply?
The eligibility requirements? Tell me, you look like this.
I have to have a letter of support from my Bureau of EMS because I'm in the MCH office.
Okay. Are there other things that people found?
I have to have a letter of support from the EMS because I'm in school of medicine.
Okay, the letters of support because you're not at the Bureau or Office of EMS.
What's a freely associated state?
Freely associated state are one of 3 islands in the Pacific Rim, one of which is the island of Palau, Marshall Islands and Micronesia, who are eligible to apply for Category 1 funding. And here we go with the funding. So this was mentioned, there's 3 categories of funding. For everyone in this room, though, you only have to worry about or be concerned with Category 3, so that's state partnership. Tommy had just asked about the freely associated. They're all under Category 1, so they're in a state plane, which is just $40,000 a year. The other thing that was mentioned was eligibility. And according to the FOA, state governments and accredited schools of medicine and states are the only eligible applicants for funding under the EMSC program. So with a show of hands, if you are associated with a school of medicine or a state government, raise your hand. Yay, that means everyone in here is eligible. Now with a show of hands, and this is already touched on a little bit, if you are associated, or I should say under the Office of EMS or Bureau of EMS, please raise your hand. Okay. So those of you who are not under the Bureau of EMS, that means you're going to need that letter of endorsement that Tony and Rhonda had mentioned, and that's attachment 7. And if your application is submitted without that letter, your application will be rejected. So now we're going to look at another section of the FOA, specifically the project narrative. So that's on pages 21 through 27. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to look at that, and then we'll come back and talk about that section. So in this section, the project narrative section of the FOA, what did you find in there?
We need to reassess.
I'm sorry,
We need to reassess.
conduct reassessments. Rhonda?
That's where I'm looking. Is the reassessment, do I need to reassess before I write the project narrative, or is reassessment a part of my plan for the future?
As part of your plan for the future, and it will be discussed in depth during the needs assessment section, which will be after lunch today. So, and if you have any questions after that, then of course.
It lists out the performance measures.
I'm sorry, what?
Lists out the performance measures.
All the performance measures are listed out. There's 10. Janet had a.
You have to include the 2011 performance report. And I guess I have a question. Is that going to be addressed later, or can I ask a question now about that?
Go ahead.
I've noticed that there is error. There are a few inaccuracies in the program performance report for New Hampshire. How do you address that in this grant?
T.
It's a very good question.
So
The 2011 report that you submitted had some inaccuracies?
Not the report I submitted, the report I got.
So the report that, I should say the letter that Jen is referring to is in January of this year.
The letter.
Versa sent out letters to each one of the program managers of essentially a report. And that,
Okay, I get it. So what I interject? I would strongly encourage you to get it resolved before you attach it to the application. Because the reason for wanting that to be included as an attachment is again for the reviewers who know nothing about your program, to make it a little bit easier to know that this is where you're at this point. So it needs
I mean,
to be
it's one of those things that's going to be quite obvious because the report says I have 50 hospitals. I have 26. So it's like, boom, something's wrong there.
So we should work to resolve that.
Okay.
I'm very sorry.
And who do you contact to do that?
And if we can't find that letter,
We can send
Yes.
it.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting.
okay, I saw another, Tony?
Yeah, on your page 3 and again on page 28, it clearly talks about the NCHP performance measures being included in this. And we're still talking about 10 performance measures. Are we doing 10 or are we doing all 15? Because the guidance clearly in several places talks about the NCHP performance measures 7, 10, 24, 33, 41.
In HRSA, EMSC is one of a few programs that had defined its performance measures long before others started working to implement it. So our performance measures are referred to as program performance measures. And then the 7, 10, 24, 33, and 41 that you're referring to that was rolled out in 2010, or MCHB performance measures, meaning EMSC is a grant, it's a discretionary grant that falls under the Maternal Child Health Bureau. And the Maternal Child Health Bureau is evaluating itself and needs to also report as the Bureau. So under the Bureau, we have those 7, 10, 24, 33. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's in there. We can talk later. But that evaluates maternal child health. The EMSC performance measures evaluates our program itself, the 10 performance measures. So yes, you have to do both and work to incorporate both, but they're really not separate. If you look at them, it's like 7 is talking about family-centered care, family, we have a family representative.
Right. Those things need to be incorporated.
Yeah, but yes.
Clearly we need to address that somehow.
Yes, somehow incorporate it into your overall project.
so you put,
But the goals are the EMSC performance measures and integrate the focus areas of the MCHB, what they're looking for. It's their way of collecting information to report how they're doing and how their programs that they fund are doing. Our performance measure evaluate how we're doing in our states, in our systems, in our hospitals.
so if you're writing about, so if you're writing about performance measure X EMSCs and Y maternal child health applies to X, you write MCH into that one?
I guess a good example is if you're looking at you're looking at one of the performance measures and you're looking at how to incorporate family representatives involved in the strategies. So part of looking at your pediatric protocols for performance measure 71 is a good example. You'd have to, part of that would probably include getting the advisory committee together to review the protocols. Maybe I'm speaking off base, but that's just an example. Is your family representative involved in that process? That would address performance measure 7. Do you have a family person or a representative of your community involved in this whole process of how you institutionalize your program?
Well, some of those things are much easier to do than others. They're already being done. We're going to get into medical homes.
Yeah, it's
Those sorts of
difficult.
things. And looking at this and talking to our group, our intention is to pull that into the categorization, prevention,
areas.
But, I think it's important to note that those things need to be specifically stated in there.
Some of them are really hard to relate to the performance measures, to relate to the program. We understand that, but those are part of MCH evaluating its programs all across.
Okay, we have some other hands up.
Quick question on page 20, under introductions. There's a little more in-depth discussion about EMS agencies in the state, the number of patient transports, how many, or 5 of the most common types of severe injuries and acute illnesses within our pediatric population. That kind of opens the door to look at, can we include our injury prevention activities if we're looking to add the required introduction pieces to the
T could probably speak more to that, but I'm going to cover a little bit about essentially 90% of your yearly budget has to be dedicated to working on achieving performance measures. So if you can make an activity performance measure related, that falls into that 90%. However, if it's not performance measure related, it falls into the other category, and that's only 10% that you're allowed to. I saw some other hands, Stephanie and Carol and Janet, so we'll go in that order if that's all right.
More speaking to that question that was just asked about performance measures. So do we state those other performance measures, the maternal child health performance measures?
No.
Or do we just incorporate that information?
You incorporate it into your activities because you're evaluating, you're self-reporting on those performance measures when you go into electronic handbook. But it's not like a goal and objective like our program performance measures. So no, you don't have to state them specifically.
Carol?
That was my question.
Okay. Janet?
In past years, we dealt with the healthy people, I guess it was 2010.
Yeah.
And in the grant guidance, it identified which of our performance measures had overlap with that. Some time ago, Jocelyn did a presentation where she talked about the maternal and child health performance measures and how that overlapped with our performance measures, the MSC ones. But I've never seen anything in writing. Is it possible to get you folks to do a little cheat sheet for people, especially the new people?
We have a crosswalk that actually was put together on the HP 2020 objectives with our performance measures.
And maternal and child health.
And maternal child health.
But I'm talking about specifically maternal and child health.
Oh, so MCHB with our program
Yeah.
performance measures?
Yeah, some kind of written
Yes.
explanation of
That's a
how,
good idea.
which ones overlap, how they overlap, and which ones sort of don't, and an explanation about what they actually mean. Some of that wording is like, huh?
I think, and I'm sorry to jump in, but Cheetah does tell on to that because several states have adopted injury prevention performance measures through their MCHP to reduce the number of children who enter into their emergency department. I think it would be helpful for those EMSC programs, if they're not aware that their state has that performance measure, because then that's their end to injury prevention.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's how we do it within my state. And we have a reduction in X amount of kids accessing the emergency department as a state MCHB performance measure.
I'm going to have Joe, and then also to remind you, after this talk, he is going to give a talk about performance, but also a part of that is Q&A where you can ask more questions. So I'm going to let Joe ask his question, and then we're going to move on.
I noted on 25, page 25, that page ready is included in the discussion here, and it said data dissemination plan should include activities related to page ready assessment. So I hope that that's going to be addressed at some point because it suggests that we are going to, that's going to be a tool we're going to use in terms of data dissemination.
Okay, what did you mean by that it'll be addressed? Is it a workshop during that section, or addressed?
Is there something that's going to be discussed as relates to how we're supposed to address that in our application?
Okay, so how, you would like to learn how to address peace readiness in your application.
Yeah.
Well, the peace readiness is associated with performance measures 74 and 75, so that is not considered another activity, and you could address it in those sections. And then once you address it, starting in the needs assessment section, you would address it throughout the entire project narrative.
Okay, but my question is, I still am not sure what kind of information I'm going to get out of that whole thing. So I have a question mark in my mind as to what data is going to be available to me through the Peace Ready project and how I'm going to be using that. And what-
They're still deciding about that, so those are valid concerns that we will bring up and discuss with HRSA about that. At this point, I'm not sure. Patty, do you know what kind of reports are available at all for managers for the peace readiness? Or is it just through that online report that they can see for their state or their region?
We're hoping that you'll be able to get the data yourself.
We're working on that.
Yeah, so that you'll be able to, and I'm sure if that's the case, we'll have a workshop on analyzing them, but hopefully you'll have the data, so that you can see the scores of readiness for your hospital and know who needs help.
Right, but Joe's asking about what's available now so that he could write that in his project narrative.
Probably the FAQ that was developed by HRSA and handed out at the grantee meeting is probably one of the most useful resources that we have right now. I know they're also developing some other FAQs. That has a lot of detail about the project itself.
We're going to save the rest of the questions for the Q&A session. We're going to go on. So we brought up priorities. Performance measures are your number one priority. And I already said this earlier, but Mike's going to talk about the budget stuff tomorrow. What that means is 90% or greater of your yearly budget has to be devoted to working on and achieving the performance measures. This does not mean you can't work on other activities. However, they can add up to only 10% of your yearly budget. So what are some performance measure related activities people are planning on working on? Joe had mentioned one, peace readiness.
We're working on our transfer guidelines. We've done pretty well on the trauma, but we still need some work on the medical.
So do you mean the written interfacility transfer
Yes.
guidelines and agreements? Okay.
Yes.
What were some other activities?
Some of the equipment needs in the outlying areas in Oklahoma.
Okay.
Some of the smaller, especially volunteer type outfits need some help there.
But
Stephanie?
wouldn't that be part of your 90%?
Yes.
Oh,
You're
yeah, I'm
asking
sorry.
No,
about-
I'm
the
talking
other
about
two.
performance-related activities right
Oh.
now. Okay, so what are some other activities people are planning on working on?
That are not performance-related.
Correct.
Well, I have a question. We have a medical and trauma system in Tennessee, but an enhancement that needs to be made to those is more robust quality improvement process in that system. So would that be considered still part of the performance measure? You're working on getting more depth in that?
Thank you, that's where I was hoping somebody would go. So Rhonda is hoping to work on a
She
quality
invited me.
improvement process for her medical and trauma system. So that would fall under as performance measure related, performance measures 74 and 75 are about traumas and medical. So it doesn't have to be that we're going to buy equipment, it could be something that relates to. Emily?
If you are getting funding from another program to do something that's not related to the performance measures, like injury prevention, you wouldn't include it in this grant?
I'll let Teeth answer that one.
Is it a focus area of the mother program?
No, that Vermont doesn't have injury prevention.
Okay.
So my office has teamed up with the maternal child health Conference in Pennsylvania to do some work on motor vehicle accidents, and we're being funded by Understanding Safety in our state for that.
You wouldn't necessarily incorporate it, but if you were going to tap into what is available in MSC to 10% and used for your partnership with highway safety, you wouldn't do this, you could include this part of your project. But you don't have to go into real in-depth details about that partnership, but it helps to have an understanding of what's it going to use 10%. So, yes. That.
Okay, so I'd like to say about the other activities, and Rhonda had a great example there, but you still have to make that strong connection so that the reviewer can see that there is a connection from those not specific performance measure, but performance measure related activities, so that they understand why you're doing it. Because one of the other things you need to remember is if you do another activity that is, when the reviewer's reading that, think, oh, that's going to be more than 10%, they're going to really question it, and that could be a possibility where you get a condition on your grant. So you have to think about this. So the other thing is the project narrative. That's what this section was all about. It's the heart of your entire grant application. So as Lenora talked about, it really needs to be comprehensive, succinct, and this is what reviewers are going to look at when they're reviewing and grading, scoring your application. In the FOA, it also lists the 7 sections you need. In the past, the last competing, there were 4 sections, but now there's 7, and these are the headers you need to have. And the reviewer is going to look at this. Speaking of reviewers, Amber is going to discuss the review process with you.
All right, so review criteria is one of the things you identified for this as an important subject to cover. So your entire grant application, and particularly your project narrative, is evaluated using the review criteria. So we want to learn more about those criteria so you understand how it's being evaluated. So we're going to talk about what is it, where do you find it, and why is it important. So first, what is it? The EMSC State Partnership Program has 6 review criteria listed here. They are need, response, evaluated measures, impact, resources capabilities, and support requested. Further, these criteria outline procedures for assessing the technical merit of an application. They're used to review and rank applications. And the criteria and the sub-criteria include critical indicators to assist the applicant in presenting the pertinent information. So the whole FOA is your recipe for success. The review criteria and sub-criteria are kind of like the ingredients. So where do you find it? The review criteria are listed under Section 5 in the FOA, Application Review Information, and it starts on page 32. This table is taken from page 33, and then detailed descriptions of each of the criterion follow this table. And there's also a handout on page 145 in your booklet, so it looks like this. It has summarized versions of the criteria. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to either read the detailed descriptions starting on page 33 in your FOA, or you can read the summarized versions on the handout, but if you choose to read that, I encourage you to read the detailed descriptions later. I'll give you a few minutes right now. right. So, now that we've talked about what they are and where to find the criteria, we want to talk about why they're important. I think you kind of understand that they are important, and this information is taken from the FOA. So they assist you, the applicant, in understanding the standards against which your application will be judged, and each application will be judged by this. That's really the main point. They're there to help you. They provide the reviewer with a standard for evaluation, and they provide for an objective review of each application. So now that we've talked about the 6 review criteria, we want to know how the points break up, because if there are 6 review criteria, but we have 7 project narrative sections and a budget narrative, how do we know the relative value of each of those sections when we have these kind of overlapping criteria? Well, NEARC devised a very complicated algorithm to help you understand the relative importance. But this is just a suggestion. The reviewers will not have this exact point breakdown, so it's just to kind of understand the relative value of each section. So the need criterion, which is worth a total of 10 points, includes both the introduction and needs assessment. So we divided it up evenly by giving the introduction and needs assessment 5 points each. The response criterion includes the methodology, work plan, and resolution of challenges sections. So we gave each of those sections 10 points, but impact also has work plan worth 30 points, making the work plan worth a total of 40 points, which is the most points of all the sections, so we know that that's a very important section. It's kind of the meat of your project narrative, and Mike will talk more about that section tomorrow. The rest of the criteria break up pretty much straight across. Evaluative measures goes into evaluation and technical support capacity for 15 points. Resources and capabilities goes into organizational information for 10 points. And support requested goes into the budget narrative for 5 points, bringing our total to 100 possible points for your grant application. All right, so we talked a bit about the reviewer already, but I'm going to give you some more information that's in the FOA as well. And then I'm also going to talk about some previous reviewer comments and common pitfalls so that you can learn from those and try and avoid those in your grant application. So first, applications all receive an objective and independent review. The review panel is seated by HRSA's Division of Independent Review, and it consists of a committee of experts qualified by training and experience related to the program review. And as we discussed, this is going to be varying levels of experience. So you want to clearly describe your program and activities as if you're writing to the general public. All right, some past comments from reviewers are these are common pitfalls, so if you just pay attention to these, then you can avoid those easy mistakes. So lots of typos, poor grammar and spelling, no organizational chart, no real detail, focuses on nemesis instead of the performance measures. So again, if you just read those criteria and those sub-criteria and follow those, and then follow some of the tips that Lenora gave, as far as good writing, having people review your drafts, then you should hopefully be able to avoid some of these pitfalls. All right, some things to keep in mind about the review criteria. Read and follow those criteria and the sub-criteria. Like I said, they're your ingredients for your success. The work plan is worth the most points, but all of the sections add up and they're therefore all important. And keep your audience in mind, the reviewers. Remember that they may not have clear understanding of the program, so you want to clearly describe it. And last, this quote is taken directly from the FOA. Applications that are significantly deficient in a number of areas of the review criteria may not be awarded funding. So as T mentioned, this isn't a competitive grant, everyone has money, but you want to make sure that you do address all of the criteria. And I'm going to hand it back over to Andrea to discuss some other considerations to keep in mind.
Janet, you scared?
No, I'm just,
Okay.
I'll just share it with you folks. The first year that we had people coming in to review our grants who didn't have EMSC background, I was called up, Kavanaugh called me up and said that they had concerns about my grant because I hadn't used the word pediatrics enough. So I had to go back and sprinkle the word pediatrics everywhere. And then they were happy.
Easy fix. So you had conditions.
No, it wasn't a condition. It wasn't a condition.
Okay, so we've already stated, even though this is considered a competition, a competing grant, you're not in competition with the MCHB. So, yay. But we already talked about reviewers and review criteria. It's important for you to write a good proposal because these reviewers are going to look at it and they're going to score it. So you have to keep that in mind. Other thing is the FOA, grant guidance, those who have looked at this in the past, it changes each year. So therefore, don't copy and paste because, as an example, the last competing, there were 4 sections and the headers were totally different. So if you just copied and pasted those and you didn't review it, you would not be writing to the FOA. The reviewer doesn't know about those past sections, so therefore, you wouldn't score correctly. Another thing is you have a state single point of contact. I don't want to say it wrong, I just have to read it, which is your SPOC. And that's listed on that form that you completed earlier. And you need to notify your SPOC of your intent to apply for the grant. And I have the link there. It's also, you have a handout on page 147 in your booklet, and that lists a whole bunch of other links that are useful. But this is to make sure that your grant application is submitted without any hitch-ups in your state. So does everyone in here have a SPOC?
I had a question about that. For those of us that don't work under the state and we're not submitting through the state, other than our letter from the state saying we're it, our SPOC would be internal to our organization, correct?
Correct.
I don't know if that's correct. I work for medical school and I have to submit it to my SPROC.
Yeah. So, and that link will take you to a map, and then the map you just click on your state and it notifies you your state. Who is it? But I saw Carol's hand go up.
Yeah, I think that the only thing I figured out that I could do was kind of send a splattergram to several people because really our point of contact is supposed to be our department head who really doesn't have anything to do with it, really doesn't read into anything. So it goes to him, it goes to his secretary, it goes to the head of our budget division who does look at it, and then it goes to the person who actually goes on the EO or the electronic handbook and actually submits it, but who doesn't really review it, but she submits it. So it's better to, I think, to just notify everybody than.
It also prevents 2 applications from state government coming in. You have maternal child health bureau of the state office that may apply. So it's your single point of contact. So that's another purpose for the letter of designation. So there's a clear understanding that we're not hit with 2 applications.
So I know you're thinking, wow, that's a really length time. I'm going to fill in the details a little bit. So think of each one of these colors as representing approximately 30 days of the process from the point that the FOA is released to the deadline. With that, this year it was released on June 27th. The next thing that happens is your personal project officer notifies you that it's been released so that you can go and download. And then you need to register at grants.gov if you have not already. And then the next process is you download those materials and you read, reread, you read again, keep reading because you're never going to stop reading it. Because every time I read that, I find something new that I didn't see before. And then as an overlap with that, you're going to write your grant proposal, you're going to obtain feedback, because Tony had mentioned how important that is, and then also revise your grant proposal. And hopefully this will happen several times. And then also you need to notify your SPOC. And then HRSA suggests that you leave the last 30 days of this whole process to getting it to your AOR so there's no hitch-ups, and that way they can let you know if you're missing anything. But you leave that last 30 days to them so that you have everything done, you've had your drafts reviewed and you receive feedback, and it's a done deal. And then your AOR will submit it to grants.gov on the due date of September 26th. So we said September 26th is the due date, and that's a Wednesday, so it's going to be in the middle of the week. The other thing is it has to be by 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's not 8 p.m. Utah time. It's 8 p.m. DC time. So they have to have it by then. And the other thing is it has to be submitted electronically through grants.gov. So Tony had brought this up, part of this, but there is an 80-page limit. That doesn't mean you have to use the full 80 pages, it just means you can't go over 80 pages. And the 80 pages, that includes the forms, the attachments, and your project narrative. 1-inch margins, that's what's required. And you may be wondering, well, where is that? If you look on page 6 of your FOA, there's a link listed there to another document that has the general requirements for all grants. So the other thing is fonts. You can't use any old font. You have to use one of these 4 fonts, and I have them listed here. Times New Roman, Arial, Courier, or CG Times. No matter which one of those fonts you choose, you have to use 12-point font. Joe?
I'm going to make a statement here, and you can tell me whether it's true or false. I have to use at least 1-inch margins. I don't have to use exactly 1 inch.
T? So they have to be at least 1 inch, but could be larger.
Is that what you were asking, Joe?
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing is that you're, for the 80-page limit, it's my understanding, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but Times New Roman, you can get the most words on a page compared to these other fonts. Is that true?
Yeah, and what you can do is you can apply those different fonts to see how much it changes them. You can just write it in one and then, but if I remember right, because I was experimenting with something you're going to see during the needs assessment to find the different fonts and see how it changed. So another requirement is one. Oh, I'm sorry, Janet.
Your 80-page limit, I think I saw that it included the self-generating table of contents. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So you should only be writing 79 pages.
Plus your letters of support.
Well, no, it's also your attachments. Your
Yes,
forms.
yes. Well, I shouldn't say writing, but other than, you're not actually creating that and putting it in. So it's something to keep in mind. It's self-generating.
The self-generating TOB, it doesn't count.
I didn't think it counted.
It's in one of your handouts as it counts.
Yeah.
The one in the project narrative.
You are supposed to put a table of contents in preceding the project narrative. That does count.
And I thought that's what you were referring to.
Okay, I didn't think that, I thought it said you didn't have to somewhere in there.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, that's what
Self-generated.
It said it was self-generated.
No, there's 2.
Self-generated.
The table of contents that you generate, that you develop to match up your project narrative does count.
Okay.
The table of contents
Contents.
that the system generates that
Does
prints
not
out
count.
on our end
Uh-huh.
is not counted.
Okay.
That the EHB, or not EHB, grants.gov, it moves over, it organizes your
Yes.
application.
I guess that wasn't clear when I was reading it.
It's actually in 2 different parts. One is in the project narrative for the table of contents of how you organize it. And I think on the table in the beginning, I could understand the confusion there. The table at the beginning where it has the breakdown.
On page 10, it talks about the application format and then the table of contents, and that's the one that's self-generated.
Yeah.
Not part of the page count, where you're talking about the other table of contents is located where?
As part of the project narrative, that's, you would create your own.
Look at page 8, a little table there, halfway down the middle of the project narrative. Far right side, talks about the right table of contents specific to this document, only as the first page. That is part of the page count as part of the project narrative?
So the table of contents you make for your project narrative counts, but the table of contents that is printed once they print it out at grants.gov does not count to the 80 page list. Another requirement is the 1.0 line spacing. This is not a default, so you'll want to make sure you go ahead and change that. Another good thing to keep in mind is we suggest you save and upload your application as a PDF. The reason for this is because depending on which version of Word that they have, when they print it out, it could be longer than 80 pages because it's different than yours. But if you save it as a PDF, it will always print the same. The other thing is no matter which program they have, they can also read yours if it's a PDF. So here's the 80-page question again. That's the total for the application, and NEATARC, since we like algorithms, we thought we would try to help you out. So if you take the 80 pages and you subtract the attachments and forms, that leaves approximately 50 pages for the project narrative. And then you have those 7 sections. So this is just an idea, a basic guideline to give you. And we base this on what the FOA says you should include in those sections, and the review criteria, and the points to give you an idea of probably how many pages you would dedicate to each one of these sections. But ultimately, it's up to you. But remember, everything put together cannot be over 80 pages long. So we had this question come up, who are you going to call? At this point, contact your person project officer. They're on the bottom of that form you completed, and they will essentially triage and let you know where you can go to get resources. So some conclusions is read the FOA several times. I have my own copy here. So that way I can look back up stuff when you guys ask me, but every time I read it, I find something new. It's your guideline. It tells you how and what you should write in your project narrative, also included in your application. And the performance measures are your #1 priority. This is your focus. And the last thing is contact your FIRSA project officer with any questions you have about your grant. So I'm going to leave any questions now for the next session because T is going to go over forms. But then in addition to that, she's also going to have a Q&A session to follow.